We did a kind of a similar deal in 2018, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. As with most state agencies, we've recognized shifting demographics. Texas has an estimated population of just under 29 million people. About 90% of those and 70% of our anglers live in an urban area in Texas. Population growth in our urban areas is expected to double in the next 40 years, and about 90% of the state's future growth is projected to be in those urban areas. Obviously, we need to, especially with the advances in R3, we need to find areas where we can bring fishing opportunities to our constituents. So a little bit about our neighborhood fishing program. It initially launched in 2003. And these are a few goals that we had in it. Obviously, trying to attract new anglers is part of it. Also, trying to get families involved, having at least one kid per 3 adults. We wanted one site in at least each metropolitan statistical area of 100,000 people. Texas has 25 of those, so it gives you an idea of how many large urban areas that we have. So, a little background: currently we have 18 sites scattered around the state. We did one of our biologists did a big study of creel of all of the sites that we had in the program as of 2015. Found about 81,000 participants published in 15. Sorry, the survey was 2012 and 13. About 81,000 participants and about 275,000 angler hours, and we identified just under half of those as new anglers, and about a third of them noted they only fished at these neighborhood fishing lakes. Obviously, the two biggest population centers in the state, the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we have 5 of these neighborhood fishing lakes. The Houston metropolitan area has 4. There's 2 in San Antonio and 2 in Austin. So the program works as we stock fish basically every 2 weeks. We have a rainbow trout season in the winter, basically mid-November until early March. And then catfish are switched over about 3rd week of April. We don't stock during August just because it's too dang hot. And then we start up again in September and go through usually the end of October. When the program began, we were only using channels. However, with that many sites, we have 5 freshwater hatcheries. And at the time, there were 1 or 2 affected by drought where they were scuttled for a little bit. So we had to turn to some contractors. Well, unbeknownst to us, the contractor switched to hybrids in 2013. And almost immediately, we started getting calls from constituents saying they can't catch the fish. And so that kind of prompted a little bit, we wanted to see what we could do, or if there was really a problem or if just perceived. So did a little research in the literature and found there was one study that had addressed it. As Sean talked about, these hybrids were supposed to be easier to catch, so we were kind of confused. But the other study was working in very small ponds and was looking at angling 5 months after they were stocked. Not very indicative of our 2-week fishery. So what we decided we were going to look at, post-stocking catchability of the pure channels versus the hybrids. And when I say a 14-day cycle is kind of what we're on. We stock, and then the next stocking date is generally 2 weeks after that. So we decided to focus on, there was a couple of sites in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, one in Waco and one in San Antonio. And all of these sites were selected because they were already receiving these hybrids from the contractor. So, and there was a variety of sizes. The Waco site is the smallest one at about 1/2 hectare. The Dallas-Fort Worth ones were about a little over 1 hectare, and the San Antonio was the largest one at about 2.5 hectares. So basically, the number stocked is determined by the size of the system. So what we decided to do, we made sure, the contract states that the fish have to be at least 12 inches. So we made sure that the fish were of proper size. The contractor hauled the channels from Arkansas and the hybrids from the Texas Gulf Coast. We split the stockings 50-50. So Waco, 71 fish in each group. The DFW area was 126 fish in each group, and then 213, and then San Antonio was 426 in each group. All fish were marked. We clipped fins. We did a trial in April, June, and September. We used a different tagging location on each of those to maybe see if we could catch, a fish we stocked in April, see it in September. We didn't see any fish that we had previously marked in any survey outside of those 2-week periods. So unfortunately, it's one contractor, and they have to be in 3 different cities. Obviously, they can't do it on the same day. So one obstacle we kind of had to deal with, work around. Wednesday was the stocking day for San Antonio. The fish were delivered in Waco on Thursday, and the Dallas-Fort Worth market was served on Friday. So what we decided to do was we did random creel surveys, 5 surveys over that 2-week period. So the first creel was the same in all situations, 1 to 2 hours after stocking. The second creel did vary a little bit based on the market. San Antonio, since it was Wednesday, it was either randomly selected for Thursday or Friday, the day 1 to 2 days after the stocking. Then a weekend randomly, a following weekday during the week after they were stocked, and then the following weekend another day. Waco, similar, except it was a Thursday stocking day, so there was a creel randomly done on Friday after the stocking, then a weekend, a following weekday, and a weekend again. And then the Dallas-Fort Worth area, our fish were stocked on Friday, so right away, stocked right after stocking. Then we had a weekend, so the Saturday or Sunday directly following the stocking, and then another weekend, followed by a weekday after. If that kind of makes sense, it's best we could do with what we had. So when we were doing our surveys, typical kind of stuff, we would ask, we would look to see who had fish harvested, and then we would inspect those fish for marks to determine the group they should be in. And then we would get some ideas of effort, how long they were fishing, zip code information. We had done some previous surveys there and figured out most of these sites, people, maybe 10 miles away from home. They're pretty home centric. And then we were also asking them about their satisfaction. So some of the results. So the biggest difference is, we saw about 80% of the fish that we encountered on the day of the stocking were channels. And as you can see, it declined pretty sharply throughout the 2-week period. And while the catch of the hybrids remained pretty low, originally we thought, well, maybe the channels bite right off the truck, and maybe the hybrids take a little longer to acclimate to the pond or something, and maybe their catch would increase as time went on. But it stayed low pretty much the entire time, which was a little bit surprising. And we saw 5 times more. So if we did 546 interviews across all 4 of the sites, saw 212 channels and 54 hybrids. So it definitely did seem that they were harder to catch. As for the satisfaction, it was fairly high across. We also kind of broke it down and looked at, whether they caught fish or didn't catch fish, if that impacted their satisfaction. Well, 65% people indicated they were satisfied, and yet they hadn't caught any fish. So maybe it doesn't really matter if they're catching fish. I know there's a lot of studies that show just the benefits of being outdoors, that kind of stuff. I don't know, but the hybrids or channels accounted for 80% of all caught fish. They were about 5 times the hybrids were 5 times more difficult to catch, at least in our 2-week period. But the difference was really only significant on that first survey. So, maybe the channels seemed to be more susceptible immediately after stocking. And then the catch of both species was low pretty much the rest of the time. That other study, big survey we did, showed that really those first 3 days was when I think 45% of the fish we had stocked we had seen harvested when it was pure channels. So, obviously you would expect if most of your channels get caught on that first survey, their catch is going to go down over the rest of the period because there's just fewer of them out there. So, not really terribly earth-shattering. But to our knowledge, this is the first time that someone has been able to document differences in catchability. And depending on what your goal is as a manager, it really can drive, your decision-making on what you want to stock. Maybe the blues or the hybrids have different feeding behaviors. Maybe we need to figure out how to educate our anglers, because maybe they were just showing up ready to catch channels and they were using the same baits that they would always use to catch channels, and maybe the hybrids didn't like that as much. But we also had an idea that there may be some stockpiling, because if we didn't see these fish, where'd they go? So we actually went out after the survey were all over with cut bait and some shad and fished for a good while at these sites to see if we could catch some of these hybrids, and nobody got any bites. So where they went, I don't know. But where do we go from here? How satisfied do you want? I think 65%. I'm happy with that as a satisfaction level. If you only stock channels, maybe your fishery doesn't last 2 weeks, and if that's what we're trying to do, maybe some level of both species would be good. One of our problems is our contractor. There just aren't very many commercial farms in Texas that are growing channels, which is why we had to go to these hybrids. So I don't know. It's just something to think about, whether what your goals are. Obviously, got to thank the other districts that helped do all these surveys. It was pretty labor intensive to be out at the site clipping fins when the truck would show up. Our DFW team, the San Antonio team, Waco, our Heart of the Hills Fisheries Science Center, and then our hatchery guys who came and brought hauling units, and the contractor is the bait barn, which they're out of the College Station area. So that's what I've got. I think I have a couple minutes for questions, maybe, if anybody has any.
Yeah, we got a couple minutes for questions. Do you have anything?
You said you were getting the hybrid and the straight channel from two different sources.
Yes.
Do you know if there's any difference in what they were feeding them, or feeding regimen, or ways they were feeding them?
I don't know a whole lot about that. I mean, there probably is some difference, but exactly what, I don't know. And we kind of designed the study around the way the program already works, because we don't really have a lot of control over who brings us, we're on the mercy of when they can stock us. So, I mean, it would have been nice to have a little more control over some of those things, but we just kind of had to go with it how it already is. Yes, sir.
And I know it's an urban area, so it's probably a put-and-take fishery, but when you tried to look for those hybrids, did you do any other kinds of sampling other than hook and line?
No, we didn't. I mean, they're, at most, they're like 3 acres. A lot of them are about 3 acres, and most are bulkheaded all the way around, and it's pretty hard to get a boat in them. But, I was interested to hear that they had tried some low frequency. I actually talked to Ben after I heard about the study they did, and I was just kind of curious, picking his brain. And, I thought, well, maybe we'll go into these sites and low frequency electrofish, and there'll just be fish everywhere. But then he said, it really wasn't very effective. So I don't think that's probably a good idea either. But yeah, we didn't do any standard sampling. It was all through the creel. Yes, Ben.
Do you have any potential entrainment? Overflow, water flowing?
No.
It's like these fish had to have died.
Or they're still there. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, they're like not even on creeks, they're catching water in the park. it's a very small watershed for these.
Any more questions? All right, thanks, Tom.
Yep, thank you.